Greetings, everyone, and welcome back to the TFT Perspective. Viewers, news coming in from Middle East again. The Syrian civil war, which was basically stopped early in 2020 by Turkey and Russia in cooperation, they ensured and protected a ceasefire that has been ongoing since the last 4 years. But now things are coming up. The news that the Aleppo city has been taken by rebel forces. Before we go into the current onslaught by northern forces against the Assad regime, one has to mention that this civil war has been ongoing since 2011, and around zero point 0.5 million people have lost their lives, 2.5 have been internally displaced, and around 3 million are externally displaced. And this uh, quagmire of civil war has been going on for more than a decade now. The current trends, which are seen through the lens of geopolitical scientists, clarifies a very big situation in front of us. Number one, the first and foremost breaking news was coming from Hezbollah and Israel after they agreed to a ceasefire, and then suddenly this chapter appeared in the Syrian civil war again. So currently, the rebels hold the Aleppo city and they are advancing towards the southern regions as well. The current standing is that the government inside Syria, the pro Assad loyalists, basically hold around 70% of the Syrian mainland, including major cities like Damascus, Homs, as well as in Latakia area where the Russians have a lot of presence. And the Iranian backed militia groups as well as the IRGC also operates in this region. We all know that since 2011 there are so many belligerents to the Syrian civil war. There's not two sides fighting, there are around 6 to 7 sides fighting against each other. But the big question is that how things unfolded right now, and this storm which is coming from the northern Free Syrian Army, or as well as the National Syrian Front, as well as some Islamist groups that have been held up inside the north for quite some time, have now come up with a strong offensive against the Assad regime. We have with us Mr. Wakar K. Kori. We are going to discuss the overall geopolitical understanding concerning this. So this came as a very big surprising shock to so many people that after such a long time, I would say 4 years, there were small scale skirmishes, but we never saw this kind of onslaught from rebel or jihadist forces from the northern areas. So how do you foresee, since the Kurds also own a very big swath of land, in fact a lot of oil rich economies run from them, as well as the previous al-Nusra front has been coming with different names. Now they are also engaged in this offensive against the Assad regime. And we also remember that since 2016, Turkey is trying to create different buffer zones inside Syria to, get rid of the Kurdish rebellion problems inside that have been infringing inside the Turkish soil with their attacks. So, how do you see this sudden shift in the war, and what's coming for us in the coming days?
I think when you say Syria at present, it may be misleading because Syria, as you mentioned, is now controlled by 6 to 7 groups, which are, let's say, supported by some external powers, or they are non-state actors. So this is, I think, very, very interesting. Unfortunately, the ceasefire that held till, I think, last few days has been broken now, and this group, basically the HTS, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, mainly it's for liberation of Syria. There's an organization for liberation of Syria, but it has a background that long time back it was Jabhat al-Nusra or Nusra Front, and then who was supporting it. I'll just go through what is the current Syrian situation for the audience, so that then they understand certainly. Because when you say Syria, probably it looks that Bashar al-Assad is controlling everything, and it's a state which is functioning normally. No, it's a state which is not functioning normally. So I'll just go through one of the maps which is available on the net. Now, if you look at Syrian map, the northeast is with the Quds,
Yes.
and within that, definitely there is the US support. And if you look at northeast, also borders Turkey and the Turkish Kurdish area, so it means that there is a scope of mischief. Some of the Kurdish rebels like YPG, and they have even conducted test attacks inside. So Turkey has a huge interest, and this is also overlapping with Iraq, because Iraqi Kurds are also adjacent, and then there are Iranian Kurds also. So all told, the Kurds are divided around 4 countries. So it means that there is a U.S. interest to, basically maybe destabilize the region. Then you have the south and southwest, which is held by Bashar al-Assad forces. Within that, there are enclaves still held by ISIS.
ISIS.
Very strange, like closer to Deir Zor and Raqqa. And then, of course, the capital is with the government forces. And then there is also an enclave which is so-called held by rebel forces, and U.S. bases are located there. So just imagine that U.S. has a military base in Syria, and it's being supported by some rebel force, some random rebel force. We don't know. Now you come to the north, and of course Golan Heights,
Has been
are
occupied
occupied
since
by
for a
Israel
long time by
since
Israel.
so almost now 50 years. In the north, you have 2 enclaves, or the buffer zone, which I think Turkey rightly created because these were the jump-off points from where terrorism was taking place. So we have Tal Abyad to Ras Al Ain, and then you have basically Afrin to Manbij. So basically north of, you can say, if you draw a line between Aleppo, Raqqa, so these are 2 enclaves. And then comes this very interesting area in the northwest. There was an enclave in Idlib province,
In Idlib
and
province.
Idlib province was basically half held by rebels, and then half was held by the Bashar al-Assad forces. And also adjacent to Idlib province are 2 ports, very important. So then comes the Russian interests. One is Latakia, and one is Tartus air base, and Latakia a naval base. And Russia has the only entry in the warm waters here. So it means the Mediterranean outlet, and they have a huge fleet there. And we have seen why they supported Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad is definitely supported by Islamic Republic of Iran and Russia.
And Hezbollah as well.
And Hezbollah as well. And in the north, if you look at, let's say, in terms of sectarian, let's say, tones, then you have Kurds divided between Sunni Kurds, and then you have these HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Shams. So all told, these are 6 different sizes of groups which control Syria. Now we come to the timing. I think that is critical because, as you mentioned, recently we had a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Iraq.
Israel.
Israel. And within that, I think this is also going to be held for a couple of months. It's not going to be a permanent ceasefire, but there's definitely Israel was bombing Iraq very badly. Lebanon. And there were a lot of casualties, but they were also suffering. There are reports that 300 Merkava tanks were destroyed, and one of their
And their northern regions, especially their cities surrounding the northern regions, were affected
very badly. And then, of course, there is a Israel-Palestinian war going on, focused on Gaza, and now also in the West Bank. So in this situation, I think somehow the HTS opening another front, it has its own pros and cons. So one is, of course, it's basically drives away the attention from the main conflict which was taking place. So it means that people will be talking less about Israel and Hezbollah, or Israel and Palestinians. So definitely the media now focus, if you look at Western media, it appears that probably this is the area where everything is happening. The other is that this also divides the narrative between Shiite and Sunni Muslims, which is, I think, very, very unfortunate, because now
there was a unity call for message when Hamas, which are predominantly Sunni, were fighting alongside their Shia brothers in the form of Hezbollah. So that whole narrative now shifts.
Yeah, whole narrative will start shifting. Then I also feel that there is something to do with the Eastern Europe and main war going on between Russia and Ukraine, because Ukraine is now, I think, feeling the heat. Trump has already indicated that probably is not going to help NATO, and Zelensky is already, I think, hinted at some kind of ceasefire and maybe land for peace. We don't know exactly what is it. So it means that neocons, who were basically now frustrated in Eastern Europe and seeing a Russian victory, would now like to open, because this front, Russian called the Southern Front, and they feel that they are here pressurizing Western allies through, even Iranian proxies like Hezbollah, and then you have Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, then you have Houthis
which
in
are now
Yemen.
moving inside Syria again.
Syria also. So there appears to be, either it is a kind of counter-offensive, or maybe STS felt that this is a good opportunity to start basically pushing toward the south and threaten the capital. Let's suppose if they, let's say, come up to Hamma, as they are saying, and then you have Homs, which is another big city. And in case they advance, we don't know, because there are conflicting reports coming from like Indian media and some of the pro-Iranian media saying that probably they are trying to now push them back. But as far as the latest situation is concerned, in case they go up to Homs, it means then Russian bases are cut off from
The main Syrian line.
Syrian line. And so it creates another situation. So all told, I think this is very, very unfortunate that now we are seeing another flare-up of conflict in the Middle East, which was already, reeling under, death and destruction. We have seen atrocities being conducted by Israel, and now we have the Syrian problem.
Yeah, we saw previously when Syria had to reestablish its diplomatic messaging. Previously, we know that the Saudis and Iranians were not at par with each other. They didn't like each other, and the major conflict inside Syria was predominated by such proxies which were supported by these groups again. So in that term, in 2020, they brokered a ceasefire, and then Bashar al-Assad also started to go with diplomatic missions to UAE and other areas to ensure that at least he has some legitimacy left inside Syria. So there are also talks that somehow this was pre-planned. All of this offensive came up exactly like a few days right after the ceasefire was brokered between Hezbollah and Israel. And this was to basically punish IRGC presence as well as Russian presence. And since so many countries are involved in the conflict, one cannot actually point the finger at who initiated this and at what cost this happened. So if we look at this in an international scope lens, how do you think that what Israel basically wants inside Syria, is it to maintain the civil war inside Syria? They don't want to assassinate Bashar al-Assad, but they do want to keep him at a very weaker placing inside Syria. And the US has its own interest. The Kurds have definitely their own interest. Turkey has its own interest in the region as well. If what we are witnessing reports coming from Iraq and from Hezbollah as well, that they are moving their forces inside Syria and they might curtail some offensives in the region. If this goes southwise and another ISIS formed group in the shape of al-Nusra Front or whatever new name they are emerging with comes up inside Syria and takes a large swath of land again, won't we witness the same situation that developed after 2014 and 15?
Yeah, maybe it is. It may be premature to, let's say, conclude everything, but definitely there is going to be more chaos. And as I mentioned, that even if you look at the countries which are surrounding, neighboring Syria, they have their own interests, and they will try to draw, maximum out of it. For instance, there are also reports that even Turkey was not at very good terms with HTS. At places they were confronting each other. But the Kurdish, rebels threat, I'm not saying the Kurdish people.
I mean, these groups, the jihadist groups came after, Bashar al-Assad basically silenced the democratic forces in 2011. And he pushed back the Free Syrian Army back inside northern areas as well. And this came up front with this massive support for different jihadist groups inside Syria. And we all know jihadist groups have been used by so many global powers that nobody is clear who to call a terrorist anymore.
Yeah, so all told, I think this is a very complicated matter. Like if you look at the refugee problem in Turkey, at the peak, I think they were very close to 4 million Syrians. And then I think now some of them were settled in the same area. And that's why they came up with the buffer zone. So Turkey has to guard its interests. One is there's a lot of, Syrian, let's say, refugees in Turkey. Then it creates its own, instability. And then, of course, is those Kurdish rebels like, PKK and YPG. Who have been terrorizing Turkish population. So they would definitely like to, I think, guard their interests. Then comes the American interests. They would like to have it, basically destabilize, as George Bush The
I
junior
like
said
how
that
they have named the Kurdish resistance front as Syrian Democratic Forces.
Syrian Democrat. So because Kurdish, enclaves allow U.S. And their Western sponsors to basically keep a region destabilized. They could actually have impact on four countries, as I mentioned. It is Syria, it is Turkey, it is Iraq, and Iran. And that is very. So we'll have to, I think, see now how it develops. In case this offensive moves further south, so it means there's going to be massive response coming from President Putin, because he can't
I think
afford.
they've already eliminated one of their leaders.
Yes, Mr.
Yes,
Julani.
Mr.
Yeah, Mr.
Jalani,
Julani was, I think, as
by a Russian
reported,
airstrike.
by Russian airstrike. So they are going to come very hard. Then, of course, going to be some response from Islamic Republic, and then, of course, there will be play up by other powers like Israel, and you may find certain assassinations taking place. I think there was some attempt on Bashar al-Assad's life also.
Hmm.
So all told, this is, I think, unfortunate. But how it starts affecting, I think Middle East, especially the area of Lebanon, we have seen it destabilize for a couple of decades now. Then you have Lebanon, which is already in a war-like condition. Israel, Palestine, even I think Jordan is feeling the heat. So all told, and this is very, very important area because it borders Mediterranean, and the other side basically you have the Middle East. So this, I think, is unfortunate, and I think there should be some effort by the OIC or the groups who can convince brotherly countries that they should jump in and stop this rot before
Because
it
at the end
becomes.
of the day, the civilian population inside Syria is suffering the most. Like I
Definitely.
mentioned, since 2011, around 0.5 million people have died.
Yes.
That's like 500,000 people.
Yes, and if you look at internally displaced Syrians, and there was a time when the people used to live in the graveyards because
Yeah.
graveyards were considered safer.
Yes.
So you had kids and parents and women sleeping in the graveyards and not staying in the cities. Aleppo is again being contested, a huge city and very, very historic. You look at this, used to be center of some of the Islamic empires, and
A very known tectonic shift placer, this city.
Yeah.
This changes fates of different civilizations.
and somehow there's something said about Afghanistan and Syria. This is, I think, historic that these are redoubts of history, and somehow big powers come around this area, and then the situation changes. So let's see how it affects, the overall situation in the Middle East. It is unfortunate. We'd again appeal to OIC because ultimately Islamic countries are affected. Even I think if Saudi Arabia and Iran can put their foot together and stop this, this will be beneficial for the Muslims.
Yeah, unfortunately, like we mentioned, that the civilian population is getting severely affected due to this wars. But that's it for today, folks. Thank you for watching our channel. Please do leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching us. Bye bye.